The rooftop restaurant glowed amber against Seoul's midnight skyline. Park Do-kyun stood motionless at the entrance, his reservation forgotten. His fingers stilled against his cufflink, the silver one she had chosen for him 3 months ago. Across the terrace, Kyoma Nwankwo laughed. Not for him. Never for him. Her head tilted toward another man. A man whose hand rested on the table, inches from hers. A man who leaned close enough to breathe her air. Something cracked behind Do-kyun's ribs. Silent. Surgical. Irreversible. The tattoo on his neck, a coiled serpent, seemed to pulse as his jaw tightened. She hadn't seen him yet. But she would. Sometimes the person we overlook becomes the one we cannot live without. If you've ever watched someone you wanted slip through your fingers, this story will grip your heart and refuse to let go. Please like, share and subscribe. The night had begun like any other. Do-kyun had left the office at 9, later than intended. A merger negotiation had stretched into hostile territory, requiring his particular brand of silence to resolve. He'd won. He always won. But victory tasted hollow tonight. It had tasted hollow for months now, ever since he'd started noticing the absence of her voice at the end of his days. Kyoma had left at 6. 6. She never left at 6. His driver had mentioned something about a reservation. A celebration, perhaps. Do-kyun hadn't asked for details. He never asked. Asking implied interest. Interest implied attachment. And attachment was a leash he'd cut from his own throat years ago. Yet here he stood. At a restaurant he'd chosen on impulse. A place he never visited. A rooftop sanctuary where Seoul's elite whispered secrets over imported wine. Here. Where she sat with another man. The maître d' approached, recognition flickering in his eyes. Mr. Park, your table is. Not yet. 2 words. Quiet as snowfall. The man retreated. Do-kyun remained rooted, his gaze fixed on the terrace beyond the glass doors. The city lights painted everything in shades of gold and shadow, but he saw only her. Kyoma wore emerald tonight. The color of new beginnings. Of growth. Of things that flourished away from darkness. The dress exposed her shoulders, shoulders he had memorized without meaning to. Shoulders that curved like questions he'd never allowed himself to ask. Her locks were gathered loosely, a few spiraling free against her neck. Silver earrings caught the candlelight. She had dressed for this. For him. Do-kyun's hand flexed at his side. The serpent tattoo coiled across his knuckles seemed to tighten, ink and skin becoming one. The other man was young. Not young enough to be dismissed, but young enough to be idealistic. He wore confidence like a borrowed suit, eager, hopeful, painfully unaware. Do-kyun catalogued him in seconds. Korean. Early 30s. Tech sector, judging by the watch. New money. Old ambitions. The man said something that made Kyoma smile. Not her professional smile, the one she offered during board meetings, polished and distant. This was different. Softer. Real. Do-kyun had seen that smile exactly once. 3 months ago. A late night at the office. She'd been reading something on her phone, a message from home perhaps, and her face had transformed. He'd stood frozen in his doorway, struck silent by something he couldn't name. She'd looked up. The smile had vanished. Sir? Did you need something? He hadn't answered. Couldn't answer. Because the truth was unbearable, yes. I need you to look at me like that. Now, another man received what Do-kyun had been denied. The terrace doors opened. A server passed through, carrying champagne. Champagne. They were celebrating something. Do-kyun moved before logic could intervene. His steps were measured, unhurried, the gait of a man who owned every room he entered. But ownership felt like ash tonight. Because she wasn't his. She had never been his. And the realization burned worse than any betrayal he'd survived. The beginning had been unremarkable. Or so Do-kyun had convinced himself. 3 years ago, his previous assistant had made an unforgivable error, leaking sensitive information to a rival conglomerate. The betrayal had cost Dookyun $12 million and a fragment of trust he'd never fully recovered. Human resources had presented candidates like offerings to a vengeful god. 4 to 7 applicants. He'd rejected 4 to 6 in under an hour. Then Kyoma Nwankwo had walked through his door. She was not what he expected. Most applicants entered his office with fear or false confidence. They adjusted their posture, modulated their voices, performed versions of themselves they thought he wanted. Kyoma had done none of these things. She'd stood before his desk with quiet certainty, her portfolio tucked beneath her arm. Her gaze had met his directly, not challenging but unafraid. "Mr. Park," she'd said, her accent carrying the musical cadence of Lagos, "I understand you require discretion, efficiency, and loyalty. I offer all three." He'd studied her in silence. 24 years old at the time. Nigerian. Master's degree from a university in London. 3 years of experience at a consulting firm that had recently downsized. Nothing remarkable on paper. But paper never told the full story. "Why Seoul?" he'd asked. Most candidates would have offered rehearsed answers about opportunity, cultural exchange, professional growth. Kyoma had tilted her head slightly. "Because staying home meant accepting a life that was chosen for me." The honesty had startled him. "And what life do you choose for yourself?" "One where my worth is measured by my capability. Nothing more. Nothing less." Dookyun had leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. He'd wanted to ask more. Wanted to understand the shadows that flickered behind her steady gaze. Wanted to know what, or who, she'd left behind. But wanting was dangerous. So he'd simply said, "You'll start Monday." She had become indispensable within months. Not because she exceeded expectations, though she did, but because she anticipated needs he hadn't yet articulated. She learned his patterns. His preferences. His silences. Other employees required instruction. Kyoma required only observation. She noticed when his headaches began before he reached for the aspirin. She recognized which calls he would refuse before the phone rang. She understood that his silence after board meetings meant solitude, not company. She never overstepped. And yet, her presence became oxygen. Invisible until it was gone. When she took sick days, rare as eclipses, the office felt wrong. The coffee was correct but unsatisfying. The schedules ran smoothly but something essential was missing. Dookyun had dismissed these observations as efficiency concerns. But lies told to oneself have a way of rotting from within. Now, watching her laugh with another man, the rot finally broke surface. He crossed the terrace. She didn't see him until he was 3 tables away. Kyoma's laughter faded. Her body went still, that particular stillness he'd learned to recognize over 3 years. The stillness of prey sensing danger. "Good," some dark part of him whispered. "Remember who I am. Mr. Park." Her voice was steady, but her fingers had tightened around her wine glass. The other man looked up, confusion evident in his features. He glanced between Kyoma and Dookyun, trying to calculate dynamics he couldn't possibly understand. "Kyoma." Dookyun let her name settle between them. No title. No surname. Just her. "I wasn't aware you had dinner plans tonight." The implication hung heavy. "You didn't tell me." She straightened almost imperceptibly. "I wasn't aware I needed to report my personal schedule, sir." "Sir." The word landed like a slap. Professional. Distant. A reminder of boundaries. But boundaries were meaningless to a man who had spent 3 years memorizing the rhythm of her breath. The other man stood, extending his hand. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Jae-won. Kim Jae-won." Dookyun let the hand hover. The serpent tattoo on his neck seemed to catch the candlelight, drawing Jae-won's gaze. Something flickered there, not quite fear but the beginning of it. Park Dookyun. He finally accepted the handshake, grip firm enough to communicate without words. Kyoma's employer. Employer. The word tasted like poison on his tongue. "Ah." Jae-won's smile wavered. She's mentioned you. Has she? Not a question. A demand disguised as indifference. Kyoma intervened, her voice carefully modulated. Jae-won is an old friend. From university. Friend. Do-kyun's gaze dropped to the table. To Jae-won's hand, which had returned to its position, inches from Kyoma's. Friends don't look at each other like that. I didn't mean to interrupt, he said, the lie smooth as silk. Enjoy your evening. He turned to leave. 3 steps. That's how far he got before the words escaped, unbidden and raw. Kyoma. She looked up. My office. 8 a.m. We have matters to discuss. Her jaw tightened. Tomorrow is Saturday. I'm aware. He walked away before she could respond. Before the mask could slip further. The drive home was silent. Do-kyun sat in the back of his town car, soul blurring past the tinted windows. His driver knew better than to speak. The city pulsed with neon and noise, but Do-kyun saw none of it. He saw only her. Her smile for another man. Her shoulders in emerald green. Her fingers so close to someone else's touch. His hand rose to his neck. To the serpent tattoo that had been inked there during a darker chapter of his life. Control, the tattoo whispered. You are in control. But control was a lie tonight. His penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building he owned outright. 37 floors of glass and steel, a monument to everything he'd built from nothing. He poured whiskey without tasting it. The city sprawled below, indifferent to his turmoil. She's just an employee. The thought rang hollow. She's been just an employee for 3 years. Another lie. The truth was simpler. Uglier. More terrifying. He had been watching her. Not casually. Not professionally. Obsessively. The surveillance had begun 18 months ago. A security concern, he'd told himself. She had access to sensitive information. Competitors would pay fortunes for what she knew. Protection, he'd justified. Prudence. But protection didn't explain why he'd memorized her morning routine. Why he knew she visited the same coffee shop every Tuesday, the one with the elderly owner who reminded her of her grandmother. Why he'd traced her subway routes, her weekend walks, her monthly calls to family in Lagos. Why he'd purchased the apartment building where she lived. To ensure her safety, he'd reasoned. But safety didn't explain the cameras. His study contained monitors. 12 screens, currently dark. 12 windows into a life she didn't know he observed. He hadn't activated them in weeks. The hunger had become too dangerous. Too consuming. So he'd tried withdrawal. Tried distance. Tried pretending she was merely competent, merely useful, merely present. It hadn't worked. Tonight proved it hadn't worked. His phone buzzed. A text from his head of security. Target remained at restaurant until 11:47 p.m. Left with male companion. Currently at Target's residence. Companion departed at 12:03 a.m. Do-kyun read the message twice. Companion departed. Jae-won had walked her home. Had stood outside her building. Had left. Alone. Relief flooded through him, unwanted, irrational, damning. He should delete the surveillance. Should end this twisted observation. Should release her from a cage she didn't know existed. But releasing her meant watching her walk toward another man. And that, Do-kyun realized, was something he could not survive. Kyoma arrived at 7:58 a.m. She always arrived early. Punctuality was armor, lateness was vulnerability. The office building stood empty on weekends, all 40 floors of Park Industries, silent as a tomb. Her heels echoed through the marble lobby, each click a declaration of composure she didn't feel. The elevator doors closed around her. Alone, she allowed herself to exhale. Last night had been a mistake. Not the dinner. Not Jae-won. But the location. She should have chosen somewhere invisible. Somewhere far from the circles Park Do-kyun commanded. Instead, she'd let Jae-won select the venue, a rooftop he described as romantic, with the earnest hope of a man who didn't understand her heart was not available for claiming. Jae-won was part of her exit strategy. Nothing more. His tech startup needed someone with her skills. He'd been courting her professionally for months, dangling offers of equity, creative freedom, escape from the golden cage she'd built around herself. Last night was meant to finalize terms. Instead, it had become something else. The elevator opened to the executive floor. His door was closed. But the light beneath it glowed. Waiting. Always waiting. She'd learned to recognize his presence even through walls. A pressure change in the air. A gravity that pulled without consent. 3 years of proximity had taught her things she wished she could unlearn. The way his voice dropped when he was angry. The way his silence stretched when he was pleased. The way his gaze lingered on her hands when she organized his papers. She'd told herself it meant nothing. But lies told to oneself have a way of rotting from within. She knocked twice. Enter. One word. Quiet as always. She opened the door. He stood by the window, his back to her. The morning light carved his silhouette into something almost vulnerable. Broad shoulders, hands clasped behind his back, a stillness that predators wore before striking. He'd dressed casually today. Dark slacks. A white shirt, sleeves rolled to expose forearms corded with muscle. And visible now, on his left wrist, another tattoo. A chain. Broken links that wrapped around bone. She'd never seen this one before. Close the door. She obeyed, though everything in her screamed to leave it open. Sit. She didn't sit. Instead, she remained standing, her bag clutched before her like a shield. He turned. And Kyoma felt the air leave the room. His eyes were wrong. Not the cold calculation she was accustomed to. Not the distant professionalism she'd learned to navigate. Something had fractured behind those dark irises. Something hungry and wounded and focused. On her. Only on her. You wanted to discuss work matters, she said, voice steady through sheer will. Did I? He moved toward her. Not quickly. Never quickly. Park Do-kyun moved like time belonged to him, unhurried, deliberate, inevitable. 3 steps. 2. 1. He stopped close enough that she could smell his cologne. The same scent she'd been trying to forget for 3 years. Tell me about Kim Jae-won. The question landed like a blade. Excuse me. Your dinner companion. His head tilted slightly. Old friend from university, I believe you said. That's correct. How old of a friend? Her spine straightened. With respect, Mr. Park, my personal relationships aren't relevant to my work. Everything about you is relevant to your work. The words were soft. Too soft. I'm not sure I understand. Then let me clarify. He stepped closer still, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. In 3 years, you have never left this office before 8 p.m. Never taken a vacation day. Never mentioned a man, a date, or anything beyond professional commitments. She swallowed. I didn't realize you were keeping track. A pause. Something flickered in his expression, something too fast to name. I track everything, Kyoma. The use of her name sent ice down her spine. He rarely used it. Always Miss Nwankwo or simply assistant when others were present. But alone. Alone, her name in his mouth became something else entirely. Is this why you called me here? She asked, fighting to keep her voice level. To interrogate me about a dinner? I called you here to understand. Understand what? He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was stripped of its usual authority. Raw. Almost human. Why him? Why anyone? And why didn't I know? Kyoma stared at him. 3 years of carefully constructed boundaries. 3 years of professional distance. 3 years of pretending she didn't notice the way his gaze lingered, the way his silence changed when she entered a room. All of it crumbled in this single question. Why didn't I know? Because you're not supposed to care, she wanted to scream. Because I am your assistant. Because whatever this is, it cannot exist. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she whispered, "You never asked." Jae-won had offered her everything she thought she wanted. His company, Ascent Technologies, was building something revolutionary, AI interfaces for accessibility, designed for underserved communities. The work was meaningful. The pay was competitive. The opportunity was golden. And most importantly, it was far from here. Singapore. Half a world away. A chance to breathe air that didn't carry Park Do-kyun's cologne. A chance to sleep without dreaming of hands she would never hold. A chance to become someone other than his. She'd been planning this exit for 6 months. 6 months of secret interviews. 6 months of salary negotiations. 6 months of convincing herself that leaving was survival, not surrender. The offer had arrived 3 days ago. Last night was meant to celebrate. To finalize terms. To take the first step toward freedom. Instead, she'd looked up from her champagne and seen him. "You never asked," she repeated, the words steadier now. "In 3 years, you've never asked me anything personal. Not about my family. Not about my plans. Not about my life beyond these walls." He stood motionless. The sunlight caught the broken chain tattoo on his wrist, making the ink seem almost alive. "So I built a life you couldn't see," she continued. "One you weren't part of. One that belonged only to me. And Jae-won is part of that life." She hesitated. The lie would be easy. "Yes, he's important. Yes, we're together. Yes, I'm leaving for him." But lying to Park Do-kyun was like lying to oneself. Pointless. He'd see through it. He always saw through everything. Except this. Except her. "Jae-won is a business opportunity," she admitted. "He runs a tech company based in Singapore. They've offered me a position." Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Complete. Then, very quietly, "You're leaving." The devastation in his voice broke something in her chest. Not anger. Not command. Not the cold authority she'd learned to expect. Devastation. As if she'd driven a blade between his ribs and twisted. She faltered. "I was going to tell you. After I'd finalized." "When?" The decision was. "When were you going to tell me?" The question cracked through the room like thunder. She flinched. She'd never seen him lose control. Not in negotiations with hostile competitors. Not in boardrooms thick with betrayal. Not in any of the 1,000 crises she'd witnessed over 3 years. But his control was fracturing now. His hands trembled at his sides. The serpent on his neck pulsed with each rapid heartbeat. And his eyes. His eyes blazed with something that looked terrifyingly like desperation. "I don't," she stepped back without meaning to. "You're my employer. This is a professional decision. I don't owe you. You owe me everything." The words exploded from him, volcanic and uncontained. 3 years. 3 years of your presence. Your competence. He broke off, jaw working. "My what?" She whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he moved. Not toward her. Away. To the window. To the city that sprawled beneath him like a kingdom. His hands pressed flat against the glass, shoulders bowing as if under invisible weight. "Leave," he said hoarsely. "Leave now. Before I say something unforgivable." Kyoma didn't move. Every instinct screamed at her to run. To flee this room, this building, this man whose presence had consumed 3 years of her life. But her feet wouldn't obey. Because she'd seen it. In that moment of fracture, she'd seen the truth he'd buried beneath power and silence. He needed her. Not as an assistant. Not as an employee. Not as a possession or a convenience. He needed her the way oxygen was needed. Invisibly. Desperately. Essentially. And she. God help her. She needed him too. "What would you have said?" she asked quietly. He didn't turn. "If I'd stayed." What would you have told me? Silence stretched between them, thick as honey. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. That I have been watching you for 18 months. That I know where you live, where you walk, what time you call your mother every Sunday. His hands curled into fists against the glass. That I have done things that would disgust you. Things that would terrify you. Things I cannot undo. Kyoma's heart stopped. But worse than all of that, he turned and she saw his expression had crumbled entirely. No masks. No control. Just devastation in human form. Worse than everything I've done is the thought of you leaving. Of never seeing you again. Of letting another man have what I've been too much of a coward to claim. She should have run. Any sane woman would have run. The confession painted him as a predator. A stalker. A man whose obsession had crossed every conceivable boundary. But Kyoma had grown up in Lagos. She knew predators. Had survived them. Had learned to recognize the difference between men who hunted for power and men who hunted because they didn't know how else to reach for love. Park Do-kyun was the latter. Broken. Twisted. Dangerous. But not cruel. Never cruel. How long? She asked softly. He frowned. How long have you felt this way? Before the surveillance. Before the watching. How long have you wanted me? The question seemed to undo him completely. He sagged against the window, a man stripped of every defense. Since the interview, he whispered. Since you looked me in the eye and told me you'd left home to choose your own worth. Since you refused to perform yourself for my approval. He laughed, a broken sound. I didn't recognize it then. Didn't have the framework to understand. But I know now that it started that day. That I was already lost before I knew to fight. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The morning light shifted, painting new shadows across the floor. Somewhere far below, Seoul hummed with Saturday traffic, millions of lives continuing, oblivious to the earthquake happening in this room. Kyoma's mind raced. 18 months of surveillance. Cameras she hadn't seen. Movements tracked. Privacy violated in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. She should be horrified. She was horrified. But beneath the horror, something else pulsed. Understanding. She knew what it was to want something you couldn't name. Before Seoul, before Park Industries, before this gilded cage, there had been Lagos. There had been her father's iron control. There had been a future mapped out in lines she hadn't drawn. Engineering, her father had decreed. A respectable profession. A proper husband. Children by 25. She'd fled not because the life was cruel, but because it wasn't hers. And here, in this tower of glass and ambition, she'd found herself building another cage. Golden bars instead of iron. Silence instead of commands. But a cage nonetheless. Park Do-kyun hadn't imprisoned her. She'd imprisoned herself. And he'd been watching from the other side of the bars, just as trapped. Show me, she said. He looked up sharply. The surveillance. The cameras. Whatever you've built. She held his gaze. Show me all of it. Why? Because I want to understand what I'm dealing with. Something flickered in his expression. Hope, perhaps. Or terror. You might hate me, he warned. I might. You might leave and never return. I might. Then why? Because I've spent 3 years pretending you were just my employer. She stepped closer, heart pounding. And you've spent 3 years pretending I was just your assistant. Maybe it's time we stopped lying. He led her to his penthouse. The drive was silent. His driver, a stone-faced man named Jinho, betrayed no surprise at the unusual passenger. Kyoma sat rigid in the back seat, maintaining careful distance. The leather between them felt vast as an ocean. But she could feel him watching. Could feel the weight of his attention like a physical thing. The penthouse was exactly what she'd expected. Cold. Immaculate. Beautiful in the way that predators were beautiful, all sharp lines and calculated elegance. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Minimalist furniture occupied precise positions. Nothing soft. Nothing warm. Nothing lived in. "This way," he said quietly. She followed him down a corridor. To a door marked with a biometric lock. The study beyond contained 12 screens. They were dark now, but their presence spoke volumes. Mounted in a semicircle around a single leather chair, they created an observation station. A throne from which to watch. "Each one corresponds to a location," he explained, voice flat. "Your apartment. The coffee shop on Insadongil. The subway station you use most frequently. Your gym. The restaurant where you eat lunch on Thursdays." Kyoma's breath came shallow. "How long?" "The first cameras were installed 18 months ago. After you were approached by a journalist seeking information about the Hansung merger. I refused that approach." "I know. I watched you refuse." He moved to the screens, not touching them. "I told myself it was protection. That you were a security risk, an asset requiring monitoring. But I started watching even when there was no threat." His voice dropped. "I watched you read on your balcony. Watched you dance in your kitchen when you thought no one could see. Watched you cry after phone calls with your mother." Kyoma's chest tightened. Cry after phone calls. Those tears had been private. Sacred. The only moments she allowed herself to feel the weight of distance from home. And he'd witnessed them. "Why did you stop?" she asked. He turned to face her. "What? You said you hadn't activated the cameras in weeks. Why did you stop watching?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Because I realized what I was becoming." His hand rose to the serpent tattoo on his neck, fingers tracing the coiled ink. "This," he tapped the serpent. "I got this when I was 19. A reminder that hunger must be controlled, or it consumes everything. And I was consuming you. You are consuming me." The correction was raw. "Every day. Every hour. Every moment you exist in my proximity, I am being devoured by something I don't know how to fight." Kyoma studied him. The most powerful man she'd ever known. A man who commanded empires, crushed competitors, shaped markets with a whisper. Undone by wanting. Just like her. "I should leave," she said quietly. "Take the Singapore job. Put an ocean between us." His expression shuttered. "If that's your choice." "I said I should." She moved closer, until she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "But I've spent my whole life doing what I should. Running from cages instead of choosing my own doors." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to understand what this is." She gestured between them. "Not the surveillance. Not the power dynamics. This. The thing that makes you watch me. The thing that makes me dream about your hands." His breath caught. "You dream about me?" "Every night for 2 years." The confession hung between them, fragile and explosive. He moved first. Not to touch her. To the wall beside the screens, where a small control panel waited. He pressed a sequence of buttons. One by one the monitors flickered, then went black. Permanently. "I can't undo what I've done," he said, turning back to her. "Can't restore the privacy I violated. Can't become a man who deserves your trust. I know. But I can stop. I can dismantle every camera. Destroy every recording. Burn this room to the ground if you ask." "And then what?" He stepped toward her. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "Then I ask for what I should have asked 3 years ago." His hand rose, hovering beside her cheek but not touching. "Not yet. Permission. To know you. To learn you properly. To earn whatever you might choose to give." The moment stretched. Outside, Seoul continued its indifferent hum. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Kyoma looked at the man before her, broken and powerful, terrifying and terrified. She thought of Jaewon. Of Singapore. Of the clean, uncomplicated escape waiting halfway around the world. Then she thought of the dreams she'd never admitted. The way her pulse raced when Dookyun entered a room. The way his silence felt like home in a foreign land. Choose your own worth, she'd told him in that first interview. Maybe it was time to choose her own desire. One condition, she said. Anything. No more secrets. No more surveillance. No more control without consent. She met his gaze. If this happens, it happens as equals. Or it doesn't happen at all. A long pause. Then, slowly, Park Dookyun lowered himself to his knees. The most powerful man in Seoul. Kneeling before her like a penitent. Equals, he repeated, the word foreign on his tongue. I don't know how to be equal. I only know how to control. Then learn. It might take years. Good thing I'm patient. Something shifted in his expression. Something that looked almost like hope. The Singapore offer. I'll decline it on Monday. You don't have to. I know. She reached down, finally allowing herself to touch him. Her fingers brushed his jaw, felt the sharp intake of his breath. But I'm tired of running. Tired of building cages and calling them freedom. What do you want then? She smiled. For the first time in 3 years, she smiled at him the way she'd smiled at her phone that late night. Soft. Real. Unguarded. I want to see what happens when we both stop pretending. Monday arrived with Seoul's characteristic precision. Grey skies pressed low over the city, promising rain that never quite fell. Park Industries hummed with its usual energy, assistants hurrying through corridors, executives murmuring into phones, the machine of commerce grinding forward. Kyoma moved through it all like a ghost. Everything looked the same. Everything had changed. She'd spent Sunday in a haze. After leaving his penthouse, she'd walked for hours, through Bukhan's Hanok villages, past Gyeongbokg's ancient walls, along the Han River's endless paths. Thinking. Processing. Trying to reconcile the man she'd thought she knew with the man who'd knelt before her. Park Dookyun. Cold CEO. Ruthless negotiator. Obsessive watcher. Park Dookyun. Broken man. Desperate heart. Supplicant at her feet. Both versions existed. Both were real. The question was, which would she face today? She found out at 8:47 a.m. Her desk phone rang. Internal line. Miss Nwankwo. His voice was controlled, professional, the mask firmly back in place. My office, please. She gathered her tablet and walked the familiar corridor. When she entered, he was seated behind his desk, exactly as he'd been thousands of times before. Dark suit. Perfect posture. Expression revealing nothing. But his eyes tracked her with new hunger. And she noticed, for the first time, the tattoo peeking above his collar. The serpent. I have meetings until 6, he said briskly. After which, I'd like you to join me for dinner. Dinner. A proper dinner. A beat. Not as your employer. The request hung between them, mundane and revolutionary. Where? Wherever you choose. Anywhere but that rooftop. A hint of something flickered across his features. I find myself unable to think of it without difficulty. Jealousy, she translated. He still can't bear the memory. There's a place in Yeonam-dong, she offered. Small. Private. No one there would recognize you. Text me the address. She nodded and turned to leave. Kyoma. She paused. Whatever happens, his voice dropped lower. Thank you. For not running. But someone else was watching them. And running would soon become the least of their concerns. The afternoon brought visitors. 3 men in expensive suits, representing interests Dookyun had carefully avoided for years. They swept into the executive floor with the confidence of those accustomed to owning whatever they surveyed. Kyoma recognized their type immediately. Old money. Old power. Old corruption. She'd grown up seeing their equivalents in Lagos, men who smiled with too many teeth and negotiated with veiled threats. Mr. Park. The leader, a gray-haired man with cold eyes, extended his hand. Chairman Seo sends his regards. Do-kyun didn't rise. Didn't smile. Didn't accept the hand. I wasn't aware Chairman Seo and I had matters to discuss. Everything is a matter for discussion when the stakes are sufficient. Kyoma was dismissed. But dismissed didn't mean ignorant. She lingered near the door, pretending to organize files, catching fragments through the walls. Hansung Industries. Merger concerns. Consequences. Her blood chilled. The Hansung merger had been completed 6 months ago, a hostile takeover that had made Do-kyun enemies in old money circles. She'd handled the paperwork. Knew the secrets buried in those documents. Secrets that powerful men would kill to protect. When the visitors left, Do-kyun emerged. His face was carved from stone, but his hands betrayed him, trembling slightly against his suit jacket. "Cancel the reservation," he said quietly. "What happened?" "Nothing you need to concern yourself with." "Don't." She stepped into his path. "We agreed. No more secrets." A long pause. The mask cracked, just slightly. "There are people who want what I have. What I know." His gaze dropped to her face, something desperate flickering there. "They'll use any leverage they can find." Leverage. Anyone important to me becomes a target. The implication hit her like ice water. Anyone important. "You're saying I'm in danger." "I'm saying," he broke off, jaw working. "I'm saying you were safer when I was just your employer." Kyoma refused to leave. Not from bravery, though that was part of it. But from something deeper. A recognition that running now, after everything, would mean surrendering the first real choice she'd made in years. "Tell me what we're dealing with," she demanded. Do-kyun sighed. He led her to his private office, secured the door, and began to speak. The story unfolded like a fever dream. Chairman Seo represented a consortium of old-guard Korean industrialists, men whose fortunes predated the economic miracles, whose power existed in shadows rather than boardrooms. They'd controlled Korean commerce for generations. Until Park Do-kyun started winning. "I wasn't supposed to rise this far," he explained, pouring whiskey for both of them. "A boy from Incheon's slums. No family. No connections. I was meant to be a tool, useful, discardable. What changed? I stopped being useful. Started being threatening." He handed her the glass. "The Hansung merger was the final provocation. I acquired something they wanted. Something they'd spent decades positioning for. And now? Now they're reminding me that power has limits. That there are forces beyond corporate law." Kyoma drank, letting the whiskey burn her throat. "What kind of forces?" He met her eyes. "The kind that make problems disappear." That night, she slept at the office. Do-kyun's insistence. His building had the best security in Seoul, biometric locks, private elevators, armed guards who answered only to him. She'd argued, but exhaustion had won. At 3 a.m., she woke to find him standing in the doorway of the guest suite. Just watching. Not moving. Not approaching. Just there. "You don't sleep," she murmured. "I sleep enough." "How long have you been standing there?" A pause. "Longer than I should admit." She should have felt violated. Should have remembered the surveillance, the cameras, the 18 months of unsanctioned observation. Instead, she felt something else entirely. Protected. "Come in," she said quietly. He hesitated. "That's not." "I know what it isn't." She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Come in anyway." He crossed the threshold like a man entering a temple. Sat in the chair across from her bed. Kept careful distance. "I used to hate sleeping," he admitted. "The dreams were always worse than whatever I was escaping." "What did you dream about?" "Hunger. Cold. My mother's face when she left." His expression was shadowed in the dim light. "She sold me to a labor gang when I was 7. Said I'd have better chances than she could offer." Kyoma's heart cracked. Did she come back? No. But I stopped looking. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. I learned young that waiting for people to return only prolongs suffering. Better to assume everyone leaves. I'm not leaving. You should. Probably. She smiled sadly. But I'm apparently not very good at doing what I should. 3 days later, Jae-won appeared at her apartment. She found him waiting in the lobby when she returned from work, flowers in hand, confusion written across his features. You've been avoiding my calls, he said. Kyoma's stomach dropped. She'd meant to decline the Singapore offer formally. Had drafted the email a dozen times. But the chaos of the past days had consumed everything. Can we talk? He asked. 5 minutes. Please. They walked to the park across the street. Seoul's evening crowds flowed around them, indifferent to the tension between two people who'd almost become something more. I thought we had an understanding, Jae-won said quietly. Singapore. The position. You seemed excited. I was. Past tense. She hesitated. Things have changed. What things? He stopped walking, turning to face her. 3 days ago, you were ready to start a new life. Now you won't answer my messages. What happened? Park Do-kyun happened. But she couldn't say that. Couldn't explain the impossible situation she'd wandered into. It's complicated. Complicated how? His expression shifted, darkening. Is this about your boss? Kyoma's silence was answer enough. Jae-won laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. I should have known. The way he looked at you that night. Like you were something he owned. It's not like that. Then what is it like? He stepped closer. Help me understand, Kyoma. Because from where I stand, it looks like the most powerful man in Seoul has trapped you in some kind of golden cage. No one is trapping me. Really? Then why are you staying? What does he offer that I can't? His voice rose. I'm offering you freedom. A chance to build something meaningful. A chance to escape whatever sick dynamic. Enough. The word cut through his tirade like a blade. Kyoma straightened, her eyes flashing. You don't get to lecture me about freedom. You don't get to decide what I need to escape from. I've spent my entire life having men tell me what's best for me, and I refuse to replace one cage with another, even a well-intentioned one. Jae-won stared at her, stunned. I'm sorry, she said, softening. I should have handled this better. But the answer is no. Singapore is no. You and me is no. Because of him? Because of me. She touched his arm gently. I need to figure out who I am without running. And I can't do that if I keep choosing escape over confrontation. She didn't see the black car parked across the street. Didn't see the window roll down, revealing a familiar face watching the exchange. Didn't see Park Do-kyun's expression fracture as Jae-won reached for her hand. He was waiting when she returned to the office. Not in his usual place, behind the desk, behind the armor of corporate authority. He was standing in the center of his office, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up. The broken chain tattoo on his wrist was fully visible. His eyes burned. You saw him again. It wasn't a question. Kyoma's heart hammered. He came to my apartment. I didn't know he'd be there. And the park? The hand-holding? His voice was deceptively calm. Was that also unexpected? She realized with cold clarity, he was there. Watching. You followed me? I was concerned for your safety. That's not, she stopped herself. Breathed. You can't do this. We agreed. No more surveillance. No more control without consent. I wasn't surveilling. I was protecting. From what? Jae-won. She laughed incredulously. His harmless. A businessman with a crush. Not some threat that requires your intervention. Any man who wants to take you from me is a threat. The words hung in the air. Raw. Possessive. Terrifying. Take me from you, she repeated slowly. Is that what you think this is? Ownership? Possession? He didn't answer. Because I told you from the start, equals or nothing. And equals don't belong to each other like property. I know what you told me. His voice cracked. But you don't understand how it feels. Watching someone else touch you. Watching someone else make you smile. After 3 years of wanting, of holding back, of telling myself I had no right. You don't have a right. I know. The shout echoed through the room. Do-kyun's composure shattered completely. He stood before her, chest heaving, eyes wild with something that looked like agony. I know, he repeated, hoarse. I know I have no right. I know I'm broken. I know every instinct I have is wrong, possessive and controlling, and everything you should run from. He turned away, hands raking through his hair. But knowing doesn't stop the feeling. Doesn't stop the hunger. Doesn't stop this, he slammed his fist against the window. This thing inside me that wants to lock you away somewhere no one else can ever reach. Kyoma stood frozen. She'd seen his darkness before, glimpsed it in surveillance rooms and midnight confessions. But this was different. This was the darkness given voice, given shape, given permission to breathe. And instead of terror, she felt something else. Recognition. You think you're the only one with hunger? She whispered. He went still. You think I spent 3 years feeling nothing? That I watched you day after day and never wanted. Slowly, she moved toward him. I've been so careful. So controlled. Building walls so high even I couldn't see over them. But underneath. She stopped an arm's length away. Underneath, I've been drowning. In you. In this. In everything I wasn't supposed to feel. He turned. His face was wrecked, all the masks destroyed, all the armor stripped away. You want me? I've wanted you since the interview. The confession tore from her throat. Since you looked at me with those cold eyes and I thought this man could destroy me. And I wanted to let him. The space between them collapsed. He moved first, or maybe she did. Impossible to know. What mattered was the collision. His hands cradled her face like she was something precious. Her fingers curled into his shirt, pulling him closer. Tell me to stop, he breathed against her lips. Tell me this is wrong and I'll. Don't you dare stop. The kiss was not gentle. It was 3 years of restraint breaking like a dam. 3 years of silence becoming a roar. 3 years of professional distance dissolving into desperate, consuming need. His mouth claimed hers with the hunger of a starving man. Her hands explored the terrain of his shoulders, his back, his arms, all the places she'd forbidden herself to imagine. He pressed her against the window, the city sprawling below them like a witness to their surrender. Kyoma. Her name on his lips was a prayer. A vow. A brand. I'm here. Don't leave. His forehead pressed against hers. Don't ever leave. I'm not going anywhere. The kiss deepened. Time became meaningless. But eventually, inevitably, they pulled apart. Breathing ragged. Hearts racing. Worlds rearranged. What happens now? She asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile crossed his features, the first genuine smile she'd ever seen on his face. Now, he said, we figure out how 2 broken people learn to be whole. Together. She returned the smile, her heart soaring. Together. But happiness in stories like this is never simple. And the men who'd visited Park Industries 3 days ago hadn't forgotten their purpose. The next morning brought chaos. Kyoma arrived at the office to find security guards doubled at every entrance. Jinho, Do-kyun's driver, stood outside her office door with uncharacteristic alertness. What's happening? There was an incident overnight. His expression was carefully blank. Mr. Park will explain. She found him in the executive conference room, surrounded by lawyers and security personnel. His face had returned to its mask of cold authority, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the darkness under his eyes. Kyoma. He rose when she entered. Everyone, leave us. The room emptied. Tell me. He handed her a photograph. She recognized herself immediately. The image captured her walking through Yeonam-dong yesterday evening, unaware she was being observed. A red X had been drawn across her face. It was delivered to the front desk this morning, he said quietly. With a note. What did the note say? Leverage can be removed at any time. Her blood chilled. Chairman Seo. The consortium. The old guard power brokers who wanted Dookyun to remember his place. They knew about her now. Knew she mattered. And they would use that knowledge. You need to leave Seoul, he said. Tonight. I have people who can. No. Kyoma. I said no. She set the photograph down with deliberate calm. Running doesn't solve this. They'll just wait until I return, or find me wherever I go. Then what do you suggest? We fight back. Her eyes met his. Together. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he laughed. Not the bitter, hollow sound she'd heard before. Something almost joyful. You're insane, he said. Probably. They'll destroy everything I've built. Then we'll build something new. They could kill us both. Then we die together. The words hung between them. Heavy. Absolute. Binding. Dookyun crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms. I don't deserve you, he murmured against her hair. Probably not. And I will burn the world to keep you safe. I know. But neither of them knew that the world was already starting to burn. That Chairman Seo had set events in motion that couldn't be stopped. That by midnight, everything they'd built together would be tested. And that only one truth would remain when the ashes settled. Some loves are stronger than survival. And some cages are worth fighting to escape. The hours that followed blurred into strategy. Dookyun's conference room transformed into a war room. Screens displayed financial data, security footage, communication intercepts. His most trusted advisors, a small circle of 4, worked in tense silence. Kyoma sat among them. Not as an assistant. As an equal. Chairman Seo's consortium controls significant media assets, explained Han Minute-ji, Dookyun's head of intelligence. She was sharp-featured, mid-40s, with the cold efficiency of someone who'd spent decades navigating shadows. Any direct confrontation risks public destruction of Park Industries' reputation. Then we don't confront directly, Dookyun replied. We make confrontation unnecessary. How? His gaze shifted to Kyoma. By removing their leverage entirely. The plan was elegant in its brutality. Chairman Seo's power rested on secrets, decades of corruption, bribery, and worse. Evidence existed, scattered across bank records, private servers, and the memories of those who'd been silenced. Dookyun had spent years quietly gathering fragments. Not for attack. For insurance. The moment they move against us, he explained, everything goes public. Every transaction. Every buried scandal. Every skeleton in every closet. Mutually assured destruction, Kyoma murmured. Precisely. But insurance only worked if the enemy believed you'd use it. And Chairman Seo had survived 60 years by calling bluffs. Night fell over Seoul. The city transformed into a glittering sprawl of neon and shadow. Somewhere in Gangnam, Chairman Seo sat in his own war room, making calculations of his own. And somewhere between them, the pieces moved toward collision. Kyoma stood by the window of Dookyun's office, watching rain begin to streak the glass. You should rest, she said without turning. So should you. I'm not the one who hasn't slept in 48 hours. He approached, his reflection appearing beside hers in the glass. I've functioned on less. That's not something to be proud of. Silence stretched between them. Comfortable now. Intimate in ways it hadn't been before. When this is over, he said quietly, I'm taking you somewhere far from here. Somewhere no one knows our names. Where? Anywhere you want. Lagos to see your family. London to revisit your university days. A beach somewhere with no cell signal. She turned to face him. You'd leave all this? I'd leave everything for 5 minutes of peace with you. The confession settled into her chest like warmth. 3 years of watching him command empires. 3 years of assuming he valued nothing beyond power. And now this. A man willing to abandon kingdoms for a woman he'd watched from shadows. I don't need beaches, she said softly. I just need you to survive the next few days. I always survive. Promise me. His hand rose to cup her cheek. I promise. The attack came at dawn. Not with bullets or threats, Chairman Seo was too sophisticated for such crude methods. It came with headlines. Park Industries CEO exposed, illegal surveillance, employee exploitation and darker secrets. The article appeared simultaneously across 12 major news outlets. Screenshots accompanied it, fragments of the surveillance system Dukyun had dismantled, twisted into evidence of corporate misconduct. By 7 a.m., Park Industries stock had dropped 18%. By 9 a.m., board members were demanding emergency meetings. By noon, police had arrived with warrants. Kyoma watched from her office as officers swarmed the executive floor. Dukyun was escorted out in handcuffs. Not resisting. Not speaking. Just walking with the terrible dignity of a man who'd known betrayal before. Their eyes met as he passed her door. Don't interfere, his gaze commanded. Let this play out. She gripped the door frame, fighting every instinct that screamed to run after him. To protect him. To burn everything down in his defense. But she understood strategy. And strategy required patience. The police station was cold. Institutional grey walls. Fluorescent lights that buzzed with indifference. Hard chairs designed to make occupants uncomfortable. Dukyun sat in interview room 3, hands folded on the metal table. The serpent tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. Detective Yoon, a veteran investigator with tired eyes, entered with a thick folder. Mr. Park. Quite a fall from grace. I'm sure you have questions. Hundreds. Yoon sat across from him. But let's start simple. The surveillance equipment found in your penthouse. 12 monitors. External feeds from a private residence. Dismantled weeks ago. Conveniently. Truthfully. The interrogation lasted 6 hours. Dukyun answered every question with measured precision. Yes, the equipment had existed. Yes, it had monitored a specific individual. No, he would not name that individual. You understand this looks like stalking, Yoon pressed. I understand how it looks. And how does it actually look? Dukyun met his gaze steadily. Like a man who made mistakes trying to protect someone he valued. Mistakes I've since corrected. Your correction doesn't erase the crime. No. It doesn't. At hour 7, Dukyun's legal team arrived. Kim Se-hyun, the best criminal defense attorney in South Korea, swept into the station with the force of a typhoon. My client has cooperated fully. You have no grounds for continued detention. We have evidence. You have screenshots released by anonymous sources with clear political motivations. Se-hyun set his briefcase down with a deliberate thud. Screenshots that I can prove were manipulated within hours. Your warrant was based on manufactured evidence, detective. And we both know what that means for your case. By midnight, Dukyun was released. No charges filed. Pending investigation. Kyoma was waiting outside the station. Rain had returned, soaking the streets. She stood beneath an umbrella, her expression unreadable. He stopped 3 feet away. You should have gone home. I should do a lot of things. A pause. Then she stepped forward, umbrella tilting to cover them both. What now? She asked. Now we show them that destroying me only makes me more dangerous. The next 72 hours changed everything. Dukyun's team had prepared for exactly this scenario. The moment the false evidence surfaced, counter-protocols activated. Bank records documenting Chairman Seo's decades of corruption appeared on international financial watchdog servers. Recorded conversations implicating consortium members in everything from bribery to human trafficking hit encrypted journalist networks. And a single devastating video, featuring Chairman Seo himself discussing eliminating problems, went viral across Asian social media. The consortium scrambled. But scrambling was too late. International regulators launched investigations. Consortium members began turning on each other, desperate to secure immunity. Stock prices of old guard companies plummeted while Park Industries began its recovery. By day 4, Chairman Seo was facing arrest warrants in 3 countries. By day 5, he'd fled to a non-extradition territory, leaving his empire in ashes. Do Kyun watched the news coverage from his penthouse. The screens that had once monitored Kyoma now displayed his enemy's destruction. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt hollow. "You don't look like a man who won," Kyoma observed, joining him on the couch. "Winning and surviving aren't the same thing." "Which did you do?" He turned to face her. "I survived. I always survive." His hand found hers. "But winning would mean deserving what I have. And I'm not sure I ever will." She studied him for a long moment. This man who'd built empires from nothing. Who'd watched her from shadows because he didn't know how to reach for her in light. Who'd dismantled his own surveillance systems as an act of penance. "Do you know why I stayed?" she asked. "No. Because you tried." She shifted closer. "You recognized what you were doing was wrong, and you tried to change. Not many people are capable of that. Trying isn't the same as succeeding." "No. But it's where redemption starts." Weeks passed. The chaos settled into something resembling normalcy. Park Industries stabilized. The investigation concluded without charges. Seoul moved on to new scandals, new headlines, new dramas. But for Do-kyun and Kyoma, normalcy was an entirely new landscape. They learned each other slowly. Dinner conversations that stretched past midnight. Morning coffee shared in his penthouse kitchen. Walks through Bukhan's quiet streets, where no one recognized the powerful CEO in casual clothes. She told him about Lagos. About her father's expectations and her mother's quiet resistance. About the night she'd booked a one-way flight to London without telling anyone. About the guilt that still surfaced when she called home. "My mother cried for a week," she admitted. "My father didn't speak to me for 2 years. And now they've accepted I won't be the daughter they planned. It's not forgiveness exactly. More like détente." He told her about Incheon. About the labor gang that had purchased him from his mother. About the factory where he'd worked until his hands bled. About the older boy Jung-ho, who'd protected him until he was old enough to protect himself. "What happened to Jung-ho?" she asked. Do-kyun's expression flickered. "He died. Workplace accident, they called it. But I knew better." "Someone killed him?" "Someone decided he was inconvenient." His voice hardened. "That's when I learned that power is the only protection that matters. And I swore I'd never be powerless again." Kyoma absorbed this. The boy who'd lost everything. The man who'd built an empire to avoid losing again. "Is that why you watched me?" she asked gently. "Because letting me exist outside your control felt like powerlessness." He was quiet for a long moment. "Partly." He turned to face her fully. "But also because watching you was the closest I could get to having you. And having you felt impossible." "Why impossible?" "Because you were so good." The word carried weight. Pure in ways I'd stopped believing in. Capable of the softness I'd trained myself to despise. Letting you see the real me meant letting you see the darkness. And you assumed I'd run. Wouldn't you? She considered the question seriously. "I grew up in Lagos," she said finally. "A city of 20 million people, most of them surviving against impossible odds. I've seen darkness, Do-kyun. I've lived in it. The difference isn't whether someone has darkness, it's whether they feed it or fight it." And me. You're fighting. She reached for his hand. Maybe not winning yet. But fighting. Trust built in inches. Dookyun learned to share spaces he'd kept private for decades. His penthouse, once a monument to isolation, began to hold traces of her presence. A book on the coffee table, her shea butter lotion in the bathroom, the scent of jollof rice when she cooked on weekends. Kyoma learned to accept protection without feeling caged. She allowed Jinho to drive her when late nights made subway travel risky. She accepted the security upgrades to her apartment building without argument. Compromise. Negotiation. The slow, careful dance of two people who'd never learned how to need another person. But scars don't vanish with time. They simply become familiar. One night, she woke to find him standing at the window again. 3 a.m. The city glittered below. His silhouette was carved against the glass, motionless as a statue. Another nightmare? She asked softly. He didn't turn. I dreamed about the factory. About Jungho's face when he realized they were going to kill him. His voice was distant. I couldn't save him. I tried, but I was too small. Too weak. She rose from the bed, crossing to him. How old were you? 12. Dookyun. She touched his arm. 12-year-olds don't save anyone. That wasn't your failure. Then whose failure was it? The people who put a child in that situation. The system that allowed it. The world that looks away from suffering because it's easier than acting. She stepped closer. You survived. You built something. You've helped more people than you'll ever know through the opportunities Park Industries creates. It's not enough. It's never enough. That's not the point. He turned finally, his expression raw. Then what is the point? The point is that you keep trying anyway. 3 months into their relationship, Kyoma's mother called with news. Her cousin Adiz was getting married. In Lagos. In 3 weeks. You have to come, her mother insisted. The whole family will be there. It's been 4 years since you visited. Mama, I can't just. You can and you will. This is not negotiable, Kyoma. You are coming home. She sat with the phone long after the call ended. Home. A word that had meant so many things. Constraint. Expectation. Guilt. Love twisted up with obligation until they became indistinguishable. Dookyun found her on the balcony, staring at nothing. What's wrong? My cousin is getting married. In Lagos. I'm expected to attend. Then you should go. She looked at him sharply. Just like that. Family matters to you. This matters. He sat beside her. What's the hesitation? It's been years since I went back. They'll have questions. Expectations. My father will want to know why I'm not married yet. My aunties will parade eligible men in front of me like livestock at a market. And you'll handle them the way you handle everything, with grace and quiet fury. Despite herself, she smiled. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. But necessary things rarely are. She was quiet for a moment. Come with me. The words escaped before she could reconsider. His expression flickered, surprise, uncertainty, something she couldn't name. To Lagos. To meet my family. To see where I come from. To show them that the life I chose wasn't a mistake. By presenting your former employer as what exactly? As the man I love. The confession landed between them like a thunderclap. She hadn't said those words before. Had danced around them for weeks, waiting for him to speak first. But waiting felt like cowardice. And she was done being a coward. You love me, he repeated slowly. Don't make me say it again. Why not? It's the first time I've heard it from anyone who meant it. His voice had gone rough. Vulnerable in ways he rarely allowed. Dookyun. He pulled her close, his lips finding her forehead. I'll come to Lagos, he murmured against her skin. I'll meet your family. I'll endure every question and every suspicious look and every eligible bachelor they parade before you. Why? Because I love you too. The words were quiet but absolute. And the man who loves you should know where you're from. Should understand the soil that grew you. Lagos swallowed them whole. The moment they stepped off the plane, Kyoma felt the city's heartbeat synchronize with her own. Heat and humidity wrapped around her like an embrace. The cacophony of voices, horns, and music created a symphony that Seoul's measured order could never replicate. She was home. And she'd brought him with her. Do-kyun observed everything with careful intensity. The airport's controlled chaos. The expressway choked with yellow danfos and okadas. The billboards advertising everything from megachurches to mobile money. The energy, raw, relentless, alive. You grew up here, he said quietly, watching the city blur past their taxi window. I grew up in this. It suits you. She glanced at him. What do you mean? You carry this energy. This refusal to be contained. He met her gaze. I always wondered where it came from. Now I understand. Her family's compound waited in Yaba. A sprawling collection of buildings where 3 generations of Nwankwos lived in cheerful proximity. Cousins spilled between houses. Aunties supervised from plastic chairs. Children chased chickens through dusty courtyards. The taxi stopped at the gate. Kyoma's heart pounded. Her mother saw them first. Kyoma! The shriek echoed across the compound. Heads turned. Bodies mobilized. Within seconds, she was engulfed in a wave of relatives, all talking simultaneously, all touching her arms and face as if confirming she was real. Do-kyun stood beside the taxi, watching the reunion with an expression she couldn't read. Eventually, the wave subsided enough for introductions. Her mother, Grace Nwankwo, formidable in her Sunday best despite it being Thursday, studied Do-kyun with undisguised evaluation. So, this is the man who kept my daughter in Korea. Mama. I kept nothing, Do-kyun said calmly. Your daughter chose to stay. I simply gave her reasons. Grace's eyes narrowed. Then, incredibly, she smiled. Good answer. Come. You'll eat. The next few days were a gauntlet. Kyoma had expected questions. She hadn't expected an inquisition. Every aunt, uncle, and distant cousin had opinions about her foreign boyfriend. Every meal became an opportunity for interrogation. Every quiet moment was interrupted by someone wanting to just talk small. Do-kyun endured it all with patience she hadn't expected. He sat through Uncle Emeka's lectures about proper marriage traditions. He tolerated Aunt Ngozi's pointed questions about his income. He even survived the group WhatsApp chat where her Lagos cousins debated whether Oyinbo men could be trusted. He's not even white, Kyoma protested during one particularly heated family meeting. Korean is still foreign, her cousin Chidi countered. How do you know he's not using you for a visa? To Nigeria. It could happen. But the real test came from her father. Chief Emmanuel Nwankwo had barely spoken since their arrival. He observed Do-kyun from a distance, during meals, during family gatherings, during the evenings when everyone sat in the courtyard drinking palm wine and debating politics. On the 4th day, he summoned them to his study. The room was exactly as Kyoma remembered. Bookshelves lined with engineering texts. A massive desk that had intimidated her childhood self. Framed degrees and certificates covering every available wall space. Her father sat behind the desk like a king on a throne. Sit. They Saturday. You left this house 4 years ago, Chief Nwankwo began, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. You told me you needed to find yourself. To build your own path. Yes, Papa. I was angry. For 2 years I refused to speak to you. Your mother told me I was being stubborn. I told her I was being principled. Silence. And now you return. With a man. A foreigner. Someone I know nothing about except that he made you stay in Korea when you could have come home. Do-kyun spoke before Kyoma could. Chief Nwankwo. I understand your concerns. Her father's gaze sharpened. Do you? Your daughter is exceptional. Any father would want to ensure she's protected. Do-kyun's voice was steady but respectful. I won't claim to deserve her. I won't promise that our path will be easy. But I will tell you this, your daughter changed everything I thought I knew about connection. About trust. About what it means to belong to someone. Pretty words. Truthful words. Do-kyun leaned forward slightly. I spent 3 years watching her from a distance, too afraid to approach honestly. When I finally did, she saw every darkness I carry and chose to stay anyway. That kind of grace. I will spend my life trying to be worthy of it. Chief Nwankwo studied him for a long moment. Then he turned to Kyoma. Is this true? You chose him? Yes, Papa. Despite his faults. Because of how he fights them. Another long silence. Then, slowly, her father rose. He crossed to where Do-kyun sat and extended his hand. Welcome to the family, Mr. Park. Adi's wedding was an explosion of color and joy. The ceremony blended traditional and modern, asoebi fabrics in coral and gold, Christian vows exchanged under a canopy of tropical flowers, drums and praise songs creating a soundtrack that seemed to shake the earth itself. Kyoma moved through it all in a daze. Her cousin looked radiant. Her family surrounded her with love. Lagos pulsed with its eternal energy. And beside her, Do-kyun watched everything with wonder. This is how your people celebrate, he said during the reception, as guests flooded the dance floor. This is how we live. She smiled. Full hearts. Full volume. Full everything. It's overwhelming. Is that bad? He turned to her, something softening in his expression. No. It's beautiful. Later, as the party continued without them, they slipped away to a quiet corner of the garden. Fairy lights twinkled in the palm trees. Music drifted from the reception hall. The Lagos night wrapped around them, warm and alive. Thank you for coming, she said. Thank you for inviting me. Was it too much? He considered the question. It was different. In ways I needed. He took her hand. I grew up believing family was a weakness. Something that could be taken or sold or used against you. Watching yours. Yes. I understand now why you carry such strength. You were built by people who love each other fiercely. Even when they argue. Even when they disappoint. The foundation is still love. She squeezed his hand. You could have that too. I already do. His eyes met hers. With you. They flew back to Seoul on a Sunday. The transition was jarring, Lagos chaos replaced by Seoul's order, tropical heat giving way to autumn chill. But something had shifted between them. Lagos had given Do-kyun context. And context changed everything. Weeks passed. Their relationship deepened into something that no longer needed constant definition. They worked together. Lived together. Built routines that felt less like compromise and more like collaboration. Kyoma officially resigned as his assistant. The conflict of interest had become untenable, not just ethically but practically. She couldn't serve his corporate interests while sharing his bed. Couldn't maintain professional distance while knowing the sound of his breathing as he slept. Park Industries' HR department processed the paperwork without comment. And Do-kyun immediately offered her something new. A position? She repeated, staring at the contract he'd presented. Strategic Partnerships Director. You'd report to the COO, not to me. Separate department. Separate hierarchy. You created this role. I created it because I need someone with your capabilities in that position. The fact that I love you is incidental. She raised an eyebrow. Incidental. Perhaps relevant. But the role itself is legitimate. She took 2 days to consider. Then she signed. But happiness built on hidden foundations is always unstable. And the foundations of their relationship still held secrets neither had fully confronted. It started with a letter. An actual paper letter, delivered to Dookyun's penthouse with no return address. The handwriting was unfamiliar, shaky, elderly, precise. He read it alone. Then read it again. Then didn't speak for the rest of the evening. Kyoma found him in his study at 2 a.m., the letter crumpled on the floor. What happened? He didn't answer. She retrieved the letter, smoothing out the wrinkles to read. Park Dookyun. You don't know me, but I knew your mother. I was with her when she died last month in Busan. She asked me to find you. To tell you she was sorry. To explain why she did what she did. If you want answers, come to the address below. I won't live much longer, and some stories should be told before they are lost forever. Kim Young-jae. Kyoma looked up. Dookyun stood motionless by the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Your mother, she said carefully. You said she sold you. She did. And now she's dead. Apparently. How do you feel? The question hung in the darkness. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I don't know. I spent 30 years hating her. 30 years building walls to protect myself from the memory of her leaving. And now she's gone. And I'll never get to ask her why. Kyoma crossed to him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. The letter offers answers. From a stranger. From someone who knew her. Someone she trusted with her last words. He was silent. Would you want to know? She asked. If it were your mother. If you'd spent your whole life wondering. Would you want the truth, even if it hurt? 3 days later, they drove to Busan. Kim Young-jae lived in a small apartment near the harbor. She was ancient, 93 years old, according to the records Dookyun's team had quietly compiled. Her body was failing, but her eyes were sharp as knives. You look like her, she said when they arrived. Same jaw. Same stubbornness in the posture. Dookyun didn't respond. They sat in her cramped living room, surrounded by decades of accumulated life. Photographs covered every surface, faces of people long gone, moments preserved in fading color. Your mother and I worked together in the Incheon factories, Young-jae began. Back when the country was still rebuilding. We were girls then. Younger than you are now. She reached for a photograph, handing it to Dookyun. A woman stared back at him, young, exhausted, achingly familiar. She was beautiful, Young-jae continued. But beauty is a curse for poor women. It attracts the wrong attention. The story unfolded slowly. Park Se-minute, Dookyun's mother, had been barely 18 when she caught the eye of a factory supervisor. The relationship was not voluntary. When she became pregnant, she was dismissed without compensation and shamed into silence. She tried to raise you alone, Young-jae said. For 7 years she worked 3 jobs. Starved herself so you could eat. Walked miles in winter because she couldn't afford transport. Then why did she sell me? The question came out raw. Young-jae's expression softened. Because she was dying. Dookyun froze. The same factory that dismissed her had exposed her to chemicals. By the time you were 5, she was already sick. By 7, she knew she wouldn't last another year. She never told me. She couldn't. How do you tell a child that his mother is abandoning him because she'll be dead before winter? Young-jae retrieved another photograph. This one showed Se-minute in what looked like a hospital bed, gaunt but still fighting. She made arrangements with the labor gang because it was the only option she could find. They promised to feed you, house you, teach you a trade. She didn't know what they really were. And when she found out, she was already gone. Young-jae's voice cracked. She died 3 months after sending you away. Her last words were your name. They drove back to Seoul in silence. Dookyun's hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. His jaw was clenched so tight Kyoma feared for his teeth. She didn't push. Didn't ask questions. Just sat beside him as the truth rearranged everything he'd believed. They reached the penthouse at midnight. He went straight to the balcony, standing in the cold wind without a coat. Kayama watched from inside, waiting. 20 minutes. 30. 45. Finally, she joined him. You'll freeze. Good. No, it's not. She draped a blanket over his shoulders, then pressed against his side. She didn't abandon me, he whispered. No. She was trying to save me. Yes. I hated her for 30 years. You didn't know. I should have found out. His voice cracked. I had resources. Power. I could have searched for the truth at any point. Instead, I built walls and told myself she was the enemy. You were protecting yourself. I was being a coward. Kayama turned him to face her. Listen to me. You were a child. A traumatized, abandoned child who had to survive impossible circumstances. The walls you built were necessary then. They kept you alive. And now? Now you can let them down. She touched his face. Now you can grieve properly. Feel everything you blocked out. And then maybe forgive. Forgive who? Her. Yourself. The universe for being unfair. She leaned into him. It's a lot of forgiving. But you don't have to do it alone. That night, for the first time since Kayama had known him, Park Do-kyun wept. 30 years of grief, released in a flood. She held him through all of it. Months passed. Grief gave way to processing. Processing gave way to acceptance. Acceptance gave way to something that looked almost like peace. Do-kyun's sharp edges softened, not disappeared but eased. He smiled more frequently. Laughed occasionally. Touched Kayama without hesitation. The serpent tattoo on his neck remained. But its meaning had shifted. Control, he explained one evening, tracing the ink in the mirror. That's what it meant when I got it. Control the hunger. Control the pain. Control everything. And now? Now. He turned to face her. Now I think control was another word for fear. And I'm learning not to be afraid. Park Industries continued to thrive. Kayama excelled in her new role, building partnerships that expanded the company's reach into African markets. Her Lagos connections became invaluable. Her perspective brought innovation that pure Korean corporate culture couldn't have generated. They worked as partners in every sense. Equal. Complementary. Unstoppable. 1 year after the rooftop restaurant incident, Do-kyun took her to the same place. The same table. The same candlelit ambience. The same view of Seoul's glittering skyline. You're joking, she said when she realized. I'm reclaiming. This is where everything fell apart. This is where everything began. He pulled out her chair. Sit. Please. She Saturday. Watched him settle across from her with unusual nervousness. His fingers tapped against the tablecloth, an uncharacteristic tell. What's happening? She asked. I'm trying to remember the speech I prepared. You prepared a speech. 12 drafts. None of them adequate. He reached into his jacket. Pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath stopped. 1 year ago, he began, voice slightly unsteady, I walked into this restaurant and saw you with another man. Something broke in me that night. Something I didn't know existed until it shattered. He opened the box. Inside sat a ring, simple, elegant, featuring a stone the exact color of Lagos sunsets. I thought what I felt was possessiveness. Ownership. The need to control what I couldn't have. But I understand now it was something else. What? Waking up. His eyes met hers. For 30 years I slept through my own life. Built empires while avoiding the only thing that mattered. You woke me up, Kayama. Not gently, nothing about you is gentle but completely. She laughed despite the tears forming. Is this a proposal or a performance review? Both, apparently. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that still made her heart stutter. I love you. I want to spend whatever years I have left learning how to love you better. Will you marry me? The rooftop fell silent. Other diners had noticed. Whispers rippled across the terrace. Someone was definitely filming. None of it mattered. Yes, she said. He blinked. Really? Did you expect me to say no? I expected you to make me suffer first. I've made you suffer for years. She extended her hand. Now put the ring on before I change my mind. They married 3 months later. The ceremony was held in Lagos, Kyoma's insistence, Dookyun's immediate agreement. The Nwankwo compound transformed into a celebration that would be talked about for generations. Traditional Igbo rites blended with Korean customs. Chief Nwankwo gave his daughter away with pride barely concealed beneath his serious expression. Grace wept through the entire ceremony. Aunties who doubted the foreign suitor now claimed credit for the match. Dookyun wore traditional agbada in deep indigo. The serpent tattoo on his neck was visible. So was the new one on his ring finger. Her name. In simple script. Permanent. You're insane, Kyoma had said when she discovered it. Probably. What if we divorce? Then I'll have a reminder of the best years of my life. You're assuming they'll be the best. I'm certain. The reception lasted until dawn. Lagos celebrated the way only Lagos could, full volume, full hearts, full everything. And when the music finally faded and the guests finally departed, Dookyun and Kyoma slipped away to the quiet garden where fairy lights still twinkled. So, she said, leaning against him. What now? Now we go home. Which home? Both. He kissed her forehead. All of them. Any place you are. That's very romantic. I'm told that's appropriate for weddings. She laughed, the sound carrying across the garden like music. In the distance, Lagos stirred toward another day. Seoul waited across the ocean, steady and patient. And somewhere between them, two people who'd found each other through shadows and surveillance, through power and vulnerability, through walls that crumbled and trust that built in their place, stood together. Not perfect. Not healed. But whole in ways that mattered. The penthouse had changed. Where cold minimalism once reigned, warmth had crept in gradually. Framed photographs now lined the walls, Lagos sunsets, Seoul skylines, faces of family from 2 continents. The study that once held surveillance screens now held books, novels, poetry, histories of both Korea and Nigeria. And in the corner, a small crib. Dookyun stood over it, watching his daughter sleep. Ji-yeon, 6 months old. With her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness. The serpent tattoo on his neck seemed less threatening now. Less about control. More about protection. You're staring again, Kyoma murmured from the doorway. She's miraculous. She's asleep. It's the only time she's quiet. Like her mother. Excuse me. He turned, grinning. You heard me. She crossed to join him at the crib. Their daughter slept on, oblivious to the weight of her parents' histories. To the darkness they'd fought. To the light they'd found. Do you ever think about how it started? Kyoma asked. The restaurant. The jealousy. All of it. Sometimes. Any regrets? He considered the question. Only that I wasted 3 years being afraid. He pulled her close. But perhaps that was necessary too. Perhaps I needed to learn control before I could learn to let it go. That's very philosophical. I've been reading. I noticed. Ji-yeon stirred, made a small sound, then settled back into sleep. Her parents watched, united in wonder. I love you, Dookyun said quietly. I don't say it enough. You say it constantly. Not enough. Never enough. She rose on her toes to kiss him. Then keep saying it. We have time. Forever. Forever. Outside, Seoul glittered with its millions of lights. Millions of stories. Millions of people navigating their own dark romances, their own power imbalances, their own journeys from shadow to light. But in this penthouse, in this moment, two people who'd found each other against all odds held on. Not because love was easy, but because love, real love, was worth every battle. Every wall torn down. Every fear confronted. Every choice made in the trembling space between darkness and dawn. Thank you for joining this journey. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more dark romance narratives that explore the depths of human connection.